Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Safely to the Moon. We have a super cool guest today. He's a director of engineering, part of the Utah Blockchain and Digital Innovation Task Force, and a former SafeMoon employee, David Wiley, aka CryptoCark on Twitter. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
We're excited. We have a ton of questions. Honestly, my first one. So you were one of really my main source of information. I don't know if you know this. When John got arrested, I was following you on Twitter because you were one of the few people that could actually read the court docs and interpret what was going on, especially the blockchain stuff. Do you think for all of our listeners, because there's still a lot of people that don't really understand why John is in prison, do you think you could break that down?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of components and pieces to this. I mean, you can go and read the court docs yourself. It's not hard, especially if you're invested emotionally or were financially into SafeMoon. But long and short of it is, well, I mean, there's 3 counts. There's wire fraud conspiracy. Mm-hmm. There's money laundering conspiracy. And what was the third one? Securities fraud conspiracy. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And so between all 3 of those charges, he's facing up to 45 years, 45, I believe. Yeah. So what he's facing in the court documents is, in my opinion, not complete. And I'm going to preface a lot of this by saying that some of this is definitely my opinion and my conjecture and my experience. And, my memory may not be absolutely perfect in a lot of situations, but been around the block for a while, since the early days of SafeMoon. Mm-hmm. And so my opinions are my own. Just want to say, if you're out here looking to sue me, please don't sue me. But I mean, but
I'll retweet that.
It's been a real concern, though, considering how happy that John had been, and right. Some of the people in the community as well that have been very focused on disparagement, defamation. So, to break it down, I would say the biggest thing is that John was, based off a lot of the court documents and what I've seen, what I've read, and what's on the blockchain, is that John was spending from the liquidity. Long and short, the liquidity is something that is supposed to belong to the holders. It's something that John has said over and over and over again that it does not belong to the holders. It belongs to SafeMoon, ergo that I can spend it however I want. And that's a really touchy subject, because when you look at things from a security standpoint, if you were to launch, say, a company, and you were to offer up shares of that company and be like, hey, I'm looking to raise $10 million. I'll give you a piece of the company. That's obviously a security offering. There's a lot of rules and regulations you have to go through in order to get that handled. For a token like SafeMoon, it's totally different and weird, because when you launched a token, there was an original offering, and that original offering should have been something that goes to liquidity. So when you're raising capital for a business, that's a security, essentially. I mean, there's multiple rules, like the Howey tests and whatnot, that determine whether it's a security. Mm-hmm. But long and short, if I were to really summarize it, is if you are going to ask the public for money for operating business capital, then that's a security offering in some way, shape, or form. Right. Again, there's nuance in there. Mm-hmm. We can dig into that. But so that's the thing is if you're going to launch a DeFi project in the United States, where you're concerned about the SEC, you want to launch the token and say, I'm going to offer this token for sale, but the proceeds from it are not going to go into operating capital. It's going to go into a liquidity pool, which allows and facilitates the trading of the token. Right. And so when you think of it that way, it's pretty obvious that the liquidity pool, if you were to claim that it's something you can draw from and spend from, then ergo it's a security, long and short. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, it's always been my stance that, the liquidity pool belongs to the holders. It's something that I've had a very firm belief since the very early days. And it's one of the reasons why I didn't accept the job at SafeMoon, is because I didn't see eye to eye with John on how the liquidity should operate. And it's very obvious, I think now, in retrospect, why John had that very firm stance as to why, well, the SafeMoon liquidity belongs to me because we're spending from it. But, if he were to be sticking his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, that's fraud. And really, what fraud is, if I could really distill it down just as simple as possible, fraud is when you say you're going to do one thing and then you don't, and you're enriching yourself at the expense of others. And so it's, I mean, there's a lot of legal terms we can dance around too with the definition of fraud. But, you know, if you look at those three charges, securities fraud conspiracy, money laundering conspiracy, wire fraud conspiracy, like all these things revolve around that idea of fraud, and saying we are not going to spend from the liquidity pool and then turning around and then doing it. And more specifically, we're not going to spend from the liquidity pool except for these reasons. And we're not going to spend from the liquidity pool without telling the community and inviting the community into that process. And so I do think that there are some ways where a project could legitimately spend from the liquidity. Not that I advocate for it or believe it, but if you were to have, say, holder authorization, like say you were a DAO, and then as a DAO you say, hey, let's vote and let's try to have let's figure out if our community is going to get together and say we're going to spend X amount from the liquidity. That's more of like holder authorization to spend funds for the benefit of the token. But the way that SafeMoon was handling is more, wow, we have all this money from the liquidity pool, let's spend it. And it gets really weird and really dicey because it wasn't just the original liquidity from the token offering. It was the liquidity that was growing from every trade of the token. And that was going into the liquidity pool. And so it got really dicey and weird because you could make the argument, and I think John did, at least from where I'm sitting, is that he saw, okay, well, maybe the initial liquidity we can't touch because of security reasons, but maybe that growing liquidity we can. And again, I don't know his state of mind, but that seems to be, from where I'm sitting, his justification for saying, well, that's from token trading, that's a tax. Let's take that, let's use that liquidity, let's use it to help the business. And I think when you're watching it from the outside, you're like, well, sure, if it helps the token project, the holders are going to benefit from the spending of some of that money, then sure. But the real problem comes when it's at personal enrichment, when he's spending, getting an egregious amount of money, spending an egregious amount of money on his stuff, his personal stuff. At that point, you go, okay, what's actually trying to run a legitimate business? And, or is this actually running a business as a facade for you to facilitate fraud and to enrich yourself personally? I think that's really where the nuance is. And I think the reason John's currently sitting in a jail cell right now is because of that personal enrichment side, which has been brought to light. And I think his desire to spend from something where he said he wasn't going to spend from.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, those are the questions that I was wondering as well in regards to that, like the taxes and the trading and stuff like that, where the money was coming from, more or less, because that's how the business was running, right? That's where all the funds were going for employee pay, for the office, for this, for that. And so that was something that I was super confused on, but now it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's not revenue per se.
Right.
It's token trading volume. I mean, it's you have a tax on the token and a certain percentage, at least in the SafeMoon, like the older SafeMoon taxation scheme. How that worked is that 5% would go to reflections, which could be distributed proportionally to everyone, and then the other 5% would go into the liquidity pool. And it was a complicated process. What it would actually do is take 5% of the tokens, because you couldn't just grab the native coin, like the backing BNB or whatever. You'd have to take 5% of the tokens and then take those tokens, and they were sold down in the contract. And then, so half those tokens of that 5%, so 2.5%, were sold on the DEX. And then the other 2.5% were then paired with the BNB that came back from that sale. Now you have a pairing, equal 1-to-1 pairing of BNB and tokens. You put that together, you put it into liquidity, and that's what kept that liquidity growing from all those token trades. And so you saw something ridiculous happen where it was hundreds of millions of dollars suddenly being injected into liquidity when SafeMoon was at its all-time high and things were going crazy. And all that money is very tempting when you see that. I remember, people would ask me, hey, this is a multi-million or even a multi-billion-dollar project. And part of me would recoil at that. I'm like, this isn't a multi-billion-dollar project. There's perhaps billions of dollars in assets at one time, but those aren't the company assets. Those are holders' assets. Those are holders. You know, you don't go to a company that's taking investor money and managing it for them and say that their investors' money are your money or your revenue.
Yeah.
You obviously don't do that. You know, if you're a hedge fund, right, you may be managing billions of dollars, but as a hedge fund, as a company, your revenue stream is not your customers' money.
Yeah.
So I think by seeing that liquidity pool and being like, you know what, if we can just tap into even a small percentage of that, we could fly. You know, we could have our own business. We could like have a HQ. We could do all these crazy things, and we could really turn this into something. So I can see how that would be the temptation when you have billions of dollars in market cap, this liquidity pool which goes going gangbusters, and the way that the smart contract worked from a technical level is that when this liquidity was generated, when you make that pairing and you put it into liquidity, what happens is you get tokens back. They're called LP tokens, liquidity pool tokens. These LP tokens are like a receipt. So when you get this receipt, or it's like a voucher, it allows for you to go back at any time with these vouchers and say, okay, I injected 10%, like a total. It's almost like shareholders, right? When you inject stuff into the liquidity pool, you become a shareholder of that liquidity pool. And then when you inject money into liquidity, you get your vouchers back that are basically saying, I can come at any time and redeem my 10% of the underlying liquidity. And so if, say, the market cap based off the liquidity pool was $10 million and you have 10%, then you could withdraw $1 million from liquidity at any time. If that liquidity pool were to balloon up to $1 billion, then you could pull out 100 million with your 10% at any time with those LP tokens.
Right.
So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to lock your tokens.
And which SafeMoon claimed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I still remember that tweet. They said $250 million of LP locked.
And then there's like the safe
graphic.
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 Yeah, and let's be real, like locking that liquidity was an actual lock of liquidity. You can go into the blockchain, you can see that being locked. But the issue is the contract, remember, generated this LP in aggregate batches with every sale, with every transfer, every buy and sell of SafeMoon. So that liquidity pool is always growing. And those LP tokens coming back, those vouchers, were locked up in tranches manually. So LP was generated automatically through the sales, but the LP tokens would just sit in the wallets and then be like, it get big enough and they'd be like, oh, now we got to lock this up, or people are going to start to get worried that we're going to rug the project. So let's lock it up. And then I'm basically saying these voucher tokens, they're moved into a smart contract where they cannot be spent. That's what locking an LP means.
Right.
And so they locked those LP tokens, those vouchers, if you will, to the underlying liquidity for a period of time. But the problem is that kept growing. So you can lock, hundreds of millions of dollars, but then what comes after? Because you still have constantly running LP tokens that come in. And if you do look at the blockchain and you do look at what they do with those LP tokens, you do see that there's all sorts of action, because they promised a few things. They said that they weren't going to spend from the LP except in cases where they're going to seed exchanges, and then maybe for some development, but will inform the community as to how and when. And that's the real sticking point, which is why I think John's in jail right now, is because that's where the fraud was, in my opinion, is if you say we're only going to spend this money by informing and letting the community know, and then you don't, then that's a misrepresentation to the community. Ergo, that's fraud. And then if you're actually spending these LP tokens like a drunken sailor on yourself, even if part of it is for legitimate reasons or to help the benefit the token, long and short of it, I mean, what's the definition of embezzlement? You may be running an official business, but embezzlement is you skimming off the top and enriching yourself. And so he's not necessarily being charged with embezzlement, but that's kind of how I wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Is I look like he was running a business. He was trying to do these things. He did say these things that he was going to do and what he was going to use the LP for legitimate reasons. But then there was, in my mind, what really feels like embezzlement on the side of embezzling that LP money for his own personal benefit and his own personal gain, and obfuscating and going through tons and tons of steps in order to try to hide or mask the fact that he was doing this, which is, it's pretty obvious when you look at the fact of his major purchases that he made, his reckless spending of money, the expensive apartments, the expensive HQ. I mean, so there's like the legitimate business stuff that he was trying to do, which I think could potentially be justified. I think it was really the personal stuff. Mm-hmm. And what do? You just say like, oh, well, I'm going to run a legitimate business with this money, but then I'm going to take out a $2 million a year salary or whatever. Not saying that's an exact number he took out, for those wanting to sue me. But just as an example, like if I were to do that, have an exorbitant bonus or an exorbitant salary or things like that, that's when you start going into embezzlement territory.
Yeah. Man, it's crazy. One question I have for you is, when did you start to see red flags?
Well, do you mind if I just kind of go from the beginning?
We'd love that.
Because you touched on a point where you said basically said, no, I don't want this job.
Yes.
Because you were offered CTO, right?
Yeah.
Because I was there that day when John's mom and
Director of Technology.
Okay.
Specific
Director of Technology.
Yeah.
When John's mom and dad, we were all sitting in that conference room, and then he's like, hey, I need to interview Kark or David. And so he left, and then basically he came back and said, I didn't give him the job. Right? From his end. And that's where I was like,
I declined.
See, then
on the record.
Exactly. And that's where I think start from the beginning, because obviously now I'm learning, he didn't even accept the job. It was more of a...
Yeah. No, let's start from the beginning. So I got involved with SafeMoon early on. I actually had some guy at work message me, and it was through our official company Slack. I was working at a company as a software engineering manager, and one of my engineers, he messaged me and said, hey, like I had a bad day, blah 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 blah, but at least I have 2 billion SafeMoon, so I got that going for me. And I'm like, 2 billion what? Excuse me, SafeMoon? Like, what a terrible name, right? I'm like, but it makes me want to ape in. Like, I want 2 billion of some shit coin. This sounds wonderful, right? And so that's when I first got involved in SafeMoon. It was in the early days, and things were just starting to get a little crazy with them. So I personally jumped in and invested, and I saw the state of the subreddit, and I love Reddit. I've been on Reddit now for 15 years now. I'm a Reddit teenager.
Yeah. You're an
OG. Yeah, I've been on there for a long time. And so I've been part of some big modding communities. It was something that I just loved to do in my spare time. I enjoyed it, mainly because it was irritating going on your favorite subs, and then you would see someone rule breaking, and then you could do something about it, which is really good. And you had the mod queue too if you're bored, and you go through and like moderate. And so I kind of enjoyed modding. It was fun.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of subreddits, some big ones with millions of users that I'm a moderator on. And so I went to SafeMoon and I go, hey, I moderate some of these communities. I would love to help out with this project because I'm a holder now. So, I see the state of your subreddit. It's in disarray. I can help out with these automation tools. I can help with like the mod queue. I can set up things in a way that's going to run really smoothly based off of my experience and seeing these other subreddits. Right. So that's how I first got involved in more of an official capacity, was to help moderate the subreddit for SafeMoon. And so it was unofficial for a little bit. And these are the early days. And so we went from 3,000 people in the subreddit community over the course during my tenure to where it topped out around 300,000. So it's a lot of wild growth. Obviously, it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people who put time, energy, and effort to curate and make it happen. But that's where the core of my involvement in the SafeMoon was as originally a moderator and then a community manager for SafeMoon, just really focusing on the subreddit side and running the subreddit side of things. And so for me, SafeMoon was, I saw the excitement in it. I started talking with Ragnar a lot. And he was leading the community at the time. And so he was the person that I reported to, and he's the person that kind of put me in charge. And then he got me more and more involved in more of like the SafeMoon core. So this is my perspective. This is what I saw. And I saw something that was quite different from what a lot of other people have seen, because I saw things factionalized. You would see like I call it the UK side of SafeMoon.
Yeah.
And then I had like the more US side of SafeMoon, with John more pairing on the UK side. And so you would have Ragnar, you would have Papa, you'd have SafeMoon Dev, and Hank. All these guys were more like on one team, and then you had John and Jack and others in the UK who were kind of paired off on their other thing, and they were at odds. And I saw this firsthand in the early days.
I didn't know that.
They were very much at odds. And so this is my perspective. I would join a VC, right? Because I would talk with Ragnar every day about running the community, but we would be on for hours and hours and hours. I would just talk with Ragnar. To this day, I actually think he's a really cool dude and a really genuine person. But for hours and hours and hours, I'd be on there with Ragnar, and he would talk to me about some of the going ons with SafeMoon. But even in those early days, it was all these guys over here in the US hated John.
Really?
Yes. And then you had the UK side of things where they thought that these other guys were just a bunch of yahoos taking everything for a ride, right?
That's interesting.
And so from my perspective, from the very early days, it was very much broken into two factions, warring factions.
Yeah.
And I would join a VC, and then Thomas would be on his phone while he's driving, like from like a weird camera angle. You'd have Hank go in there. There'd be Ragnar, and there'd be and SafeMoon Dev, who we now know as Kyle.
Yeah.
And they would all be in there. I'd see Kyle's face. I'd be like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I'm like let in on this like big secret, And it was really cool because I thought at that time SafeMoon's the legitimate way to do things. All these other projects, they were rugging left and right, and these guys are, they're doxing themselves. They're creating a legitimate business entity. They have all these big plans. They raised all this money, and so I thought this is the right way they're doing things. It was very exciting for me to kind of be led into like the inner group of this. But man, they hated John, and I'm not kidding. Like, I'd pop in, and there was a little soundboard. They'd be like, "F John," right? Yeah, I mean, it was. I'm not kidding when I say in the early days of SafeMoon, it was definitely like us versus them.
Why did they hate John so much?
Yeah,
they thought he was a little tyrant.
That's fair.
Yeah, they thought he was a little tyrant. They thought that he was. It all went to his head. That it started out as like a small group of people who were kind of in it together, but he quickly consolidated control, and then he leveraged things not through motivating people or exciting people or involving people. He led like a little dictator, was based off what they were telling me. And so again, I'm considering the source, right? I mean, obviously Thomas was on the indictment as well, right? And there's some things based off some of those court documents and some of the allegations made, is that it seems to be that they were in much more cahoots at certain times than I even realized or what I saw at the time. But I do think that any collaboration between them, I think was strictly selfish for people being involved. I don't think it was friendly and amicable. For them, if they were to collude together and to work on these things like, on fraud together during those early days, it would have not have been, kumbaya, we secretly like each other and work. I think it would have been, I'll scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or here's my deal, there's your deal. That's my total impression from it, is I don't think this would have been they were all like buddies.
Yeah.
They despised John. And John didn't even really know, I don't think. I don't think he had any.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
He had no clue at all. And so here's where things got a little crazy. So that's when a few of those people that I mentioned, Thomas and SafeMoon Dev and Hank specifically, decided, I think the story that I heard, because this might be a little hearsay, but from what I heard, is that someone got drunk one night and created a contract for something called Piggy, right?
I remember hearing about this.
Yes. So there was another token that was generated on the down low called Piggy, and I was not aware of this until after it had launched. So I think like SafeMoon Dev and Thomas and Hank were pretty secretive about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I saw and my concern with all of this is that they launched a token. It was a 15% tax instead of a 10%. Ooh, innovation.
Yeah.
And one of the things they did different in the smart contract is when trades of tokens happened, the LP being generated, the tokens that came back, instead of going to the owner wallet and having to be locked manually, these tokens were then sent to the burn address. So in Piggy, originally, from what it looked like on the outset, is that it was designed to be, from what I heard, a SafeMoon without John, where it was unruggable, where you couldn't spend from the LP. And so being involved with them in those early days where I heard little bits and pieces, I was still kind of kept out. Like, here I am joining their VCs, but like I didn't hear a thing about this stuff happening. They're doing it very secretively. And so if anyone's very cloak and dagger, it would definitely be more SafeMoon Dev. I think he does things very, very secretively from what I've seen. But I applied to SafeMoon. I wanted to work at SafeMoon in those early days. So I was talking with Ragnar. I was like, hey, I want to work at SafeMoon. I really want to help. Here's my experience in leading engineering teams and building departments up from ground zero. Like, let's go in here. Let's turn this into like a real legitimate company. Let's go do this.
Yeah.
And so here I am talking with Thomas about it and SafeMoon Dev about it and Ragnar about it and Hank about it. They're interviewing me.
Yeah.
But John, apparently I found out way later, had no idea. And so what happened, so here I am thinking I'm interviewing for SafeMoon. And then Kyle comes to me and he goes, hey, tell you what, I want to get you a job on SafeMoon, but we need John's buy-in. And it's going to be difficult without having something demonstrable to show. So I have a project for you, if you would, to where if you can help me out for this one project, and it's not a shit token, right? It's more of a legitimate engineering project. I'm going to do it under my own company for now, and it'll be a trial run for SafeMoon. And I'm like, okay, I'm down. Like, what's it called? What's the deets for this? And so I signed an NDA with Kyle Nagy to work on a project, which for a long time I couldn't talk about. I didn't feel comfortable talking about because I signed an NDA.
Right.
And my word's my word, my word's my bond. So I wasn't going to talk about it. And I didn't see anything illegal or anything in there unethical.
Right.
But I feel comfortable talking about it now since Kyle's literally a fugitive on the run. So like there's no reason not to talk about it now.
Right.
But so I was working on a project that was like actually gold stables backed at project. So it was not like you go out and run up a bunch of money for a shit token. It was actually, let's build like a stable asset backed project. And this stable asset backed project was designed in a way to where it just constantly grew in value over time. Right. And so to me, that was a really exciting project for me to work on under Kyle. And so I ended up leading a project and did the recruiting for it and managing for the engineering of it.
Got it.
And it lasted a few months. And then that's when Kyle ghosted me. Like he stopped responding. Things got like weird and distant. And I got payment for it.
Yeah.
It was through his LLC. So here I am doing legitimate engineering work, excited to work on something that's not like a shit token as a trial run for SafeMoon. And I got payments from Kyle, which were very generous for the work that I did. And I was very excited to, okay, let's move on to the next steps. Let's work for SafeMoon. But behind the scenes, that's when Kyle kind of got pushed out.
Yeah.
or left. I'm not really
He
sure.
was bought out.
Yeah.
From what we
And so that's why he went silent. And so here I'm in this weird situation where I'm working for Kyle, but like things were weird with Kyle because he had this secretive Discord group where he called it Worker Bees.
worker bees.
Really?
And he had all of his little projects he was doing on the side because Kyle wanted, in my opinion, Kyle wanted to create a bunch of little projects. If he was able to launch SafeMoon and have it be so successful, maybe he can replicate that success.
Yeah.
And if John's not playing ball with him, then he's going to go off and do his own thing.
Yeah.
So ergo, Peggy comes around, and this is where I start seeing some weird things. Is he sent me a message like after it had launched. He's like, "Hey, just so you're aware, here's another project." He didn't tell me that he launched it or they made it.
Kyle messaged.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
And he's like, "Here's Piggy," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And it was already live. It was already public. I was like, I looked into it. I asked some people around about it. People were familiar with it. And then Ragnar was like, "Yeah, I've heard of Piggy or whatever. I bought some," and I was like, "Cool." And so that's where I first heard of Piggy was after it had launched, after it went live, where it was secretly created by this group. And so the plan was that I found out a little later that the plan was that, and I don't know how much of this was boisterous talk or how much of this was like legitimate, was to actually siphon the SafeMoon community onto the Piggy project because it was, well, for one, the SafeMoon army is huge. There's so many people. So, of course, it was a prime target to try to draw people into the project. And two, that there was a bit of a suicide pact, so to speak, that if Thomas were to get fired, then Hank was gone, Ragnar was gone, Kyle was gone. Right. Or any of them were to be fired or leave or for whatever, it would trigger the suicide pact and they would all leave.
Yeah.
And then they would throw John under the bus, and then they would talk about how here you go, here's SafeMoon without John, which is this Piggy project.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because when you launch a token during the pre-sale, if you were to launch a token in stealth mode where no one knows about it, no one's heard about it, you can launch a pre-sale and it gets no attention almost. At all. And you can go in and you can buy up that pre-sale and get a large percentage of the tokens in circulation. Yeah. And so that was what I saw kind of after the fact, which made me kind of like feel gross about the Piggy project, is after the fact, long after the fact, I found out that many of the tokens that were actually dumping on the Piggy project were tied to these original developers. Yep. Associated with friends and family or even their own wallets. They just bought up a ton. Yeah. They were in stealth mode. They didn't tell anyone and be like, guys, we're going to go public with this, or we're going to let people know, or we're the SafeMoon dev people. We're the SafeMoon people, the original developers. So this is going to be big. It's going to have to be big. Here's the big plans. Yep. So that's what I want to illustrate to the listeners today is that there was this civil war in the early days of SafeMoon where half the dev team was out gallivanting, creating and managing other token projects because they were shut out from SafeMoon. UK group, yeah. And UK group was really running things. Yeah. But Thomas was the face that everyone loved. Hank, for some reason. Hank, I don't know about Hank. I don't really know. But here's okay. So backing up a little bit. So there was this guy named Josh the Moon Man. He was the guy who actually put $500,000 down towards the SafeMoon exchange. I don't know if you guys remember.
Oh, I remember that. So because this was when SafeMoon tweeted saying, "Hey, we're raising funds for the exchange," and they raised $1 million supposedly.
Yes. And half of that originally was from Josh the Moon Man.
Poor guy.
And he was based in the UK. Really cool guy, actually. I met him because he was a Reddit moderator as well. Wow. For the subreddit. So I got to really know this dude. He was really cool. But he had a big bag, and I think a lot of that $500,000 probably came either from gifts from Kyle or from his own bag or something like that. So he was obviously, a shrewd investor who wanted to generate hype for the token as well because, he had his own motivations. Yeah, that made sense. Yeah. But anyway, Josh the Moon Man was revered by the moderator community in the early days of SafeMoon. And Ragnar and Thomas and Kyle and Hank being this sort of separate Civil War group hating on John so bad
Yeah.
and so like disaffected by how SafeMoon was being ran, well, all the moderators were kind of invited into that sentiment secretly.
Yeah.
So it was like, hey guys, like here's the bad things about John. Hey, here's really his temperament. Hey, I don't want to go public with this, but John is, a terrible person for XYZ. And they would cite things. Hank always talked about how, he would call him up at like in the middle of the night and demand things. And Thomas would complain the same thing as well. Like he just felt like he was just being told what to do and not being invited in on anything, that they were being shut out from the decision-making process, that it all felt very coordinated. And so they rebelled, right, against him. And so when internally what happened is John said something very mean-spirited towards Josh the Moon Man, and everyone revered him because, he did so much for the community.
Yeah.
And so when that happened, there was almost like a revolt that happened in the moderator community in SafeMoon, where a bunch of these early OG moderators peeled off. And, they say idol's hands is the devil's worship.
Yeah.
So these moderators, disaffected moderators, went off and joined a Discord. And this was called RBTC, Red Beard Trading Company.
Yep.
Okay, there's a guy named Ginger, who you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
Ginger was one of the early senior community manager mod types, who led a lot of the Discord efforts.
Yeah.
And so Ginger created his own little disaffected, like, we're just going to create a Discord, we're going to get together, and we're going to, like, seek out new DeFi projects and share details about different pre-sales and things like that. Just like you think of any DeFi degen community.
Yeah, Telegram community.
Yeah. So, but these people were friends. They knew each other from the early SafeMoon days.
Yeah.
They also, too, wanted to replicate the success of the early SafeMoon, of course. So then what happened is Thomas and Hank and SafeMoon Dev, they realized that they had a pre-baked community leadership in a box of all these disaffected moderators. When they went out and they created the Piggy project, they go, well, we need someone to run and manage this community. So they went secretly to RBTC and they go, hey, here's this new project, hush, hush. Can you guys help moderate and lead this? Because it's going to be the next big thing. And RBTC was like, well, yeah, sure. Like, this is awesome. And by this point, like, it was already launched and things were already out there. So they were like, yeah, we'll help moderate this. And when they were kind of let in on the secret of like, we think that the original SafeMoon people are involved, it was always like rumors and speculation.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Then, it started generating hype, because when you think that you had this really successful multi-billion-dollar project, and then the same devs are behind this like undoxed project that no one's ever heard about, like, be like, I want to get in early. It was that early DeFi degen stuff, right?
How many times did we hear that with projects that we talked to? Like, this is the dev from Shib and this.
Oh,
and
yeah,
like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh! And
Yeah,
people jumped, eyes closed.
Yep, and that's how it is in DeFi. Unfortunately, is that people they hear rumors and they'll buy the rumor and then they'll sell the news.
Yeah.
So if you were to get a tip, like a rumor, like insider nudge nudge or something like this, like this project may blow up, right? You don't sit there and you don't think about the morality of it. You don't go like, you know what? Like, I wonder if this is like a legitimate, like, people just ape in. Just be like, I already bought. You didn't finish telling me what it is and I bought it, right? Because to them, it's a moonshot.
Yeah, if they buy, they publicize it. People will then see that, then buy. It's like individual hype to then get community hype.
Especially if you've already been an investor in a SafeMoon type project where you see your money 10x, 100x, then you get addicted to that.
You do, and you want it again. Again, this is all about trying to replicate that early hype and success of SafeMoon. And so this Piggy project, and now RBTC getting involved with sort of like the managing of this project after it had launched. Things got weird. So this is my perspective. I saw both sides. Things were weird for me, because I, on one hand, was friends with Ginger, because he was also a fellow community manager along with me in the early days. And so I joined their Discord, and we're just hanging out on their Discord. Ginger ended up kind of turning it into being more militant. I don't know whether it was designed that way or just sort of happened that way.
Yeah.
And I know that he tried to do things to kind of keep people in check.
Yeah.
But there was like a little bit of a civil war now. The piggy people started encroaching in and trying to peel away the big whales from SafeMoon.
Right.
And they were successful to some degree. Some of the big whales from SafeMoon came over into the piggy project due to these sort of like subversive civil war, right?
Right.
The moderators on SafeMoon, keep in mind, I'm in their Discord channel. I'm in there as well. They saw this as like awful because some of these things that some of the RBTC people were doing were truly horrible.
Yeah.
So for example, there were a few members of RBTC that I believe doxed someone from SafeMoon.
Oh wow.
And threatened them. There are some people who had like a mental breakdown and like had to be like hospitalized, I heard, or something like that. Like it was bad. And then in response, Ginger ended up like kicking those people from the RBTC Discord, those more militant people, and being like, no, we're just a trading group. We're just a trading group. Like we don't want this civil war thing going on, right? But who held a lot of the bags for Piggy were people who were in RBTC, right? Yeah. So it was really interesting to see kind of that back and forth dynamic of these two token communities, one of disaffected SafeMoon developers and moderators against SafeMoon, and then SafeMoon really kind of digging inwards to itself, being like, we're under assault, we're under attack. These people are horrible, degenerate people.
Yeah.
And so I remember being on both sides of that because I'm friends with a lot of people. I just hang out and talk with a lot of people, and I'm here in this Discord, and I'm just hanging out. I'm just like, okay, well, I'm seeing all this happen. This is interesting.
Yeah.
And I saw both the good and the bad on both sides, like the good and the bad on the SafeMoon side, the good and the bad on the RBTC side. And things got more and more, I think, militant on both sides.
Yeah.
To the point where that's when eventually Thomas and Hank made their appearance into into RBTC.
Yeah.
So they finally showed up and they made it official. It was no longer any rumor or speculation anymore. Mm-hmm. You now had Hank coming into RBTC's Discord.
Were they still officially at SafeMoon at this time?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So Hank went into RBTC's Discord and said all those things that were leaked in that audio, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Can you go over that? Because I haven't heard about that in a while.
Okay, so here's the story, and here's how I was directly involved. I somehow find myself in the middle of these things, even though I don't want to be.
Awesome.
Right. So here I am on one side, like I deeply, genuinely believed in the SafeMoon project. I really felt like it could be something huge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also was seeing this other stuff happening with RBTC and the disaffected side, and so it was really weird because at the beginning I was kind of more of like, man, like, these disaffected developers, like they definitely feel that SafeMoon's being poorly managed, that John's a problem. They want John gone. And so for a while I was like, I'm starting to see bits and pieces of this.
Yeah.
Because like on the SafeMoon side of things, John was very distant, he was very secretive, the same sort of treatment that he was treating the other people who were supposed to be his partners on this. The original co-founders of SafeMoon essentially were being cut out. The moderators were obviously cut out, and really just kind of left to their own devices.
Yep.
Like here's your runway. Here's some stuff to go. If there's FUD, deal with it. But there was no really like secrets being leaked inside the moderator Discord or anything like that. It was just sort of like just manage the community. That's kind of how it was. Mm-hmm. So on the other side, when Hank came into RBTC, Hank said, well, Piggy, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was essentially the essence of it. Piggy is going to make you rich. Our next project will make you and your family filthy rich.
Oh, no.
Right?
Nice.
And this is the secretive project that was codenamed NDA. Sorry, not NDA. NFA, not financial advice.
Yeah.
And so it was her next project, and that's when Hank comes in and he talks about all these amazing things they're going to do, and RBTC is just in awe. They're like, we got the deets, we got the lowdown on this next project they're doing. So
from the SafeMoon dev team.
Yeah, from the SafeMoon dev team. So Piggy,
Jeez.
Piggy was almost already tapped out at this point,
Yeah.
I think. So because they had all this rumors and speculation of Piggy being the next big thing, but they already had their sights set on another project beyond Piggy,
Wow.
right at this point. And so it was really interesting because you were able to see sort of the insight when Hank came in and be like, yeah, I hold the keys to the Discord, to the Twitter. I'm just going to yoink him. He owes me all this money. Hank says that he was drunk or that he regrets it and all that. But that was Hank. It was legitimate Hank in that moment.
Yeah.
That was true transparency. So that was
Wow.
that was secretly recorded by one of the members of RBTC.
Yeah.
And forgotten about. So I wasn't there. I wasn't present. I heard that, hey, Hank came in here and made it official that they actually were the ones behind the Piggy project. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And then they got another big project that's coming up soon. It's the next big thing. And I'm like, oh, geez.
Sounds legit.
And so things started getting really wild. But this is where I had sort of like this reckoning where I had to make a decision as to what I was going to do.
Yeah.
In my role that I was playing in all of this. And so that's when I started doing some sleuthing on the blockchain, because I'm like, I'm going to really dig into this Piggy project. I'm going to see where all this money is going, because Piggy started to collapse after that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were focused on the new.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I found, based off my investigation, I created a very comprehensive wallet map.
Yeah.
Very, very comprehensive. And I found all sorts of, and I'm careful with what I'm saying because I don't want to do defamation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my opinion. But based off what I saw, it led me to believe that a lot of the pre-sale wallets that were set up around Piggy were the ones that were associated with this OG SafeMoon group, right? And so Piggy dumping RBTC, which the narrative that you would hear from some of the other pro SafeMoon people is that RBTC is a big pump and dumping group or whatever, right? And RBTC is not without its demons, for sure, like I mentioned, like their whole little civil war little thing that they had with SafeMoon. And I don't think Ginger's a saint by any stretch of the imagination. But there was definitely this when I created this wallet map, I saw pretty clear evidence in my mind that there was something definitely wrong. And I believed at this point, I was like, I don't think they created this project in good faith.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of these pre-sale wallets were bought up by the OG dev team. They went out and they sold this on the rumor that they're the ones that are going to undox themselves, going to be the next big thing. And then they dumped and they killed the Piggy project. And that shocked me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to do something with this information. Well, I told Ginger about everything that I uncovered. I shared with him my wallet map and everything, and he got super livid.
Of course.
He got super pissed because he's like, oh my gosh, like they were just milking us the whole time. Like we were the whale group that they were courting so that we would jump in, pump the price up, and then they would dump in because they would buy first, bring in other people, and then dump on them. That was what Ginger said that they were doing, or alleged that they were doing. And so, so they dug up the old audio, be like, wait, we got audio of when Hank came into the RBC Discord and shared it with me. And they're like, we're going to leak it. We're going to blow up SafeMoon, right? And I was like, here I am, like I'm working for SafeMoon,
So
right?
You just started this.
Yeah, so I'm working for SafeMoon, and I'm like trying to have SafeMoon be successful on one hand, right? And I'm hearing all these horrible things about John, but I never saw it personally. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then now I uncovered blockchain evidence of what really disturbed me about the Piggy project. Right. And I'm like, and Nobility as well, because they were devs for the original Nobility.
Right.
I do remember
And
that.
so,
One.
and a lot of the pre-sale wallets, and I'm not saying Nobility is fully wrapped up in this, but like they had a lot of pre-sale wallets in Nobility as well, and they liquidated a lot of those as well, at least from what I saw or what I believe.
That's crazy.
So I saw this, I was very perturbed by it.
Yeah.
So I went to Ragnar, who I trusted. And like I said, Ragnar, I believe, is a genuinely good dude. I feel like he's not conspiratorial minded at all. He's always been just the nice guy that's always been cut out of conversations. Like
Right.
he's the mushroom that always, they feed him shit and he grows in the dark, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I talked with Ragnar about this, and I showed him my evidence. I showed him the wallet map. I go, look, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Every transaction on the blockchain has a story, so I'm not going to jump to conclusions, but it looks really bad. It looks really bad in my mind. So I shared this wallet map with him, and Ragnar went through all the transactions with me, and he's like, okay, okay, all right, like this looks really, really bad. Well, Thomas and Ragnar have been friends for like 10 plus years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, so Ragnar went to Thomas with this, and he goes, all right, here is the wallet map that Kark made. What do you have to say about this? Because obviously, you're my friend, for many, many, many years. What's your opinion on this? And then, according to Ragnar, Thomas then proceeded to be like, oh, Kark doesn't know what he's talking about. This is all like innocent stuff, right? Which, I'm open-minded. I can be wrong. I have been wrong in the past, for sure. I don't want to like throw blanket accusations out. That's not my style, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Thomas apparently looked at this. Well, what happened is I didn't know that Ragnar talked to Thomas about this. And then Thomas had someone who was like a spy in RBTC or whatever.
That sounds right.
It's kind of weird. But anyway, that's when Thomas started sending messages to John about how I think Kark's breaking his NDA. I think Kark is actually working against SafeMoon, right? Because that was, I went to Ragnar in confidence. Ragnar went to Thomas. Then Thomas freaked out at my wallet map, tried to get me fired over at SafeMoon.
Yeah.
Which was like mind blowing. That pissed me off because I found out about this kind of through the grapevine. I was like, this came from Thomas, and this came from this person who was like a mole in the RBTC or whatever. Like, this is so silly, right?
Yeah.
It's just random discords that I just hang out in, and then suddenly, it's like very factionalized. Like you're either with us, you're against us, or you're, it was like Civil War, like Cold War stuff. It was weird, dude. But anyway, so when I heard that Thomas was trying to get me fired, and then I also got sort of this elusive, I perceived as a threat, where it was basically, and I'm not quoting verbatim, but it was something to the effect of, if Kark knows what's best for him, he is going to forget that this wallet map ever exists, and he's not going to say a word to anyone.
Whoa.
And so, gloves are off.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And I go, okay, so this is what I'm going to do.
What's up, everybody? This is Jonas from the future. Sorry for the interruption, but we decided to cut this episode in half. We had so much crazy stuff from Kark and bombs dropped. We're really excited for this next part. So stick around, make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.